Friday evening, 6:12 p.m. Marcus came home from work. He did not take off his shoes. He stood in the doorway of our kitchen and he said, "I want a divorce." 5 words. No argument before them, no fight that week or that month, no conversation that had been building toward this. Just 5 words, delivered standing in a doorway with his shoes still on, like a man who needed to say something before he could let himself sit down. I stood at the stove with a wooden spoon in my hand. I said, "What?" "I want a divorce," he said again. "I'm sorry, it's done. I've already talked to a lawyer." "Marcus!" "I can't explain it. I just need this. I need out." He turned around. He went to the bedroom. I heard him packing a bag. I stood at the stove. The pasta water was boiling over. I did not move to turn it off. I stood there with a wooden spoon in my hand, and I watched 5 years of my marriage end in the time it takes to say 5 words. My name is Lena Whitfield. I am 25 years old. I grew up in Cicero, a suburb just west of Chicago, the kind of place that is part of the city's gravity without quite being the city itself. My father worked for the city's water department. My mother was a nurse. I am an only child, which meant, growing up, that I was the entire focus of 2 people who had built their lives around making sure I had more options than they did. I went to community college for 2 years, then transferred to UIC for accounting. I met Marcus Reyes at 20. He was 23. He worked construction, not glamorous, but steady, the kind of work that built something real and he was genuinely proud of. He had grown up in Pilsen, 5 miles from where I grew up, close enough that our worlds overlapped without ever quite touching until the night we met at a mutual friend's barbecue in Douglas Park. He was funny in the dry, observational way of someone who notices everything and says only some of it out loud. He was steady. There is that word again. The word I find myself returning to in every story I have ever told about my life before the Friday in March, because it was the truest thing about him, or the truest thing I believed about him. We dated for a year. We married at 21 and 24. We rented an apartment in Pilsen, the neighborhood he grew up in, a 2-bedroom above a bakery that meant our apartment smelled of bread most mornings, which I had loved. For 5 years, I would have told you my marriage was good. Not perfect. We argued about money sometimes. We did not have much of it, and the specific stress of being young and not having much money puts pressure on a marriage in ways that people who have never experienced it underestimate. We argued about whose turn it was to do things. We argued about his mother occasionally, in the specific way that young couples argue about in-laws. But underneath the arguments, something I believed was solid. I just did not know that yet. The Friday in March came without warning. I want to be precise about this because I have spent 3 years trying to find the warning signs I must have missed, and I have come to understand, finally, that there were none to find. Not because I was not paying attention, because Marcus had engineered it that way. The week before had been ordinary. We had eaten dinner together every night. We had watched something on a Wednesday. He had gone to his brother's for a poker night on Thursday, which he did most Thursdays, the same group of guys he had been playing cards with since high school. Friday morning he came home and said he wanted a divorce. I asked him every question I could think of. Was there someone else? No, he said. Was it something I had done? No, he said. Did he still love me? He did not answer that one directly. He said, "I just need this. I need to start over." Start over. I have thought about that phrase more than almost any other phrase in my life. Start over. At the time, I had understood it as the language of someone who was unhappy in a marriage and could not articulate why. The vague, frustrating language of someone leaving without explanation, the kind of thing therapists probably have a term for. Emotional unavailability, conflict avoidance, something. I did not understand it as what it actually was. Literal. He needed to start over, with $1.3 million that I did not know existed. The divorce took 4 months. There was not much to divide. We had been married 5 years, we were young, our combined assets were modest. The apartment was a rental. We had a car, jointly owned, that Marcus let me keep. We had a small joint savings account, $11,000, which we split. Marcus did not fight me on anything. I understand now why. He needed the divorce to be clean, quick, uncontested. He needed it filed and finalized before anything could complicate it, before any forensic examination of his finances, before any discovery process that might have required him to disclose assets I did not know to ask about. I did not know to ask her to look deeper. Why would I have? I believed at 25, with a wooden spoon somehow still vivid in my memory 3 years later, that I was watching the end of a marriage that had simply, mysteriously, stopped working for my husband. I did not know I was watching the execution of a plan. I moved out of the Pilsen apartment in April. I moved back in with my parents in Cicero. 25 years old, divorced, starting over in the specific, unglamorous way that starting over usually looks like, which is a childhood bedroom and a mother who makes too much food because feeding you is the only thing she can think of to do with her own grief about your grief. I cried for months. Not dramatically, the quiet, exhausting kind of crying that happens in a car in a parking lot before you go into work, that happens at 2 a.m. when you wake up reaching for someone who is not there. I asked Marcus's mother once, his mother, Carmen, who I had loved, who had been kind to me for 5 years, who I had believed would always be in my life in some capacity even after the divorce. I asked her if she knew why. She had looked at me with an expression I did not understand at the time and would only understand 3 years later. "I don't know, mija," she had said. "He won't tell me either." I believed her. I do not think she was lying. I think Carmen Reyes, like me, like everyone else in Marcus's life at that time, did not know about the ticket. Because the entire architecture of what Marcus did depended on no one knowing. Not me, not his mother, not his brother, no one. I rebuilt my life slowly. I got my own apartment 8 months after the divorce, a small studio in Bridgeport, the kind of place a person can afford on an entry-level accounting salary if they are careful. I worked. I made new friends. I did the specific, quiet work of becoming someone whose identity was not organized around a marriage that had ended without explanation. 3 years passed. I was 28 when the letter arrived. Not from Marcus, from Carmen. I had not heard from her in over 2 years, the natural drift of an in-law relationship after a divorce, the specific way that people who loved you because of someone else gradually recede when that someone is no longer the bridge between you. The letter was short. She wrote that she needed to tell me something, that she had only recently found out herself, that she had spent weeks deciding whether to tell me and had decided that I deserved to know, regardless of what it meant for her relationship with her son. She wrote 4 sentences that changed everything I understood about my own life. Marcus won the Illinois State Lottery the Thursday before he asked you for a divorce. $1.3 million. He told me last month, finally, after 3 years of silence. He filed for divorce the next morning before he ever told you, so that the money would never be considered marital property. I read the letter 4 times. I sat at my kitchen table in my small apartment in Bridgeport, and I understood, finally, what start over actually meant. I called Carmen the same evening. She answered on the second ring. "Lena," she said. Her voice was careful, apologetic. "Tell me everything," I said. She told me. Marcus had bought the ticket at a gas station on Thursday, the same Thursday as his poker night with his brother and his friends, the ordinary Thursday I had not thought twice about. He had checked the numbers Friday morning, on his phone, on his way to work. He had won. $1.3 million. The lump sum payout after taxes would be approximately $800,000. Still enormous, still life-altering. Still more money than either of us had ever imagined having access to. He had told no one. Not his brother, who he played poker with every Thursday. Not his mother. Not me. He went to work that Friday evening as if nothing had happened. He had come home that Friday evening and asked for a divorce. He told me, Carmen said, that he panicked, that he thought about what it would mean to tell you, to suddenly have that much money in a marriage, what it might do to you both, how it might change things, and instead of telling you, he decided the cleanest thing was to end the marriage first, before the money could become marital property, I said. Yes, Carmen said quietly. He planned it, I said. He didn't panic into a decision. He planned the divorce specifically to avoid sharing the money with me. A long silence. I think so, Carmen said. Wayna, I am so sorry. I did not know. He told me a month ago. He's been struggling, I think, with what he did. He's been different since the money. Not happier the way you'd think, different. Why are you telling me now? I said. Why not when you found out? Because I needed to decide whether telling you was the right thing or whether it was just going to hurt everyone for no purpose. I went back and forth for weeks. And then I thought about you, 25 years old, sitting in your parents' house, not understanding what had happened to your marriage. And I thought, she deserves to know, even if it changes nothing, even if it's just so she understands. I sat with that. It might not change nothing, I said. I called Priya Anand the next morning. She no longer worked at the small Pilsen practice. She had moved to a larger firm downtown, the natural trajectory of a young attorney building her career. But she remembered me, and when I explained what I had just learned, her voice changed in a way that told me this was not a small thing. Lena, I need you to come in today. I went in that afternoon. I brought Carmen's letter. Priya read it twice. This is significant, she said. This is... Lena, do you understand how significant this is? Tell me, I said. She explained. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, like most states. Marital property, meaning assets acquired during the marriage, is divided fairly upon divorce. The lottery ticket had been purchased the day before Marcus filed for divorce, while they were still legally married. That made the winnings, under Illinois law, marital property, regardless of when the divorce was filed, regardless of whether Lena knew about it at the time. He had an obligation, Priya said, to disclose all marital assets during the divorce proceedings. The lottery winnings should have been disclosed. He concealed them deliberately. That's not just a missed disclosure, that's fraud on the court. What does that mean for me? I said. Priya looked at the letter again. It means, she said slowly, that we may be able to reopen this. Illinois courts have specific provisions for cases of fraudulent concealment of marital assets during divorce proceedings. If we can prove what's in this letter, that he won the money before filing and deliberately hid it to avoid division, the court has significant discretion in how to remedy that. How significant? Cassia said. In cases of clear, deliberate fraud, Priya said, courts in this state have, in rare cases, awarded the entire concealed asset to the wronged party, as both compensation and as a deterrent against exactly this kind of behavior. I sat very still. The entire amount? I said. In the most egregious cases, Priya said. And Lena, This is about as egregious as it gets. He won the money on Thursday and filed for divorce specifically to keep you from ever knowing about it. That's not a gray area. That's a man who used the legal system itself as a tool of deception. We needed to build a case. Carmen's letter was a start, but Priya explained that we needed more. Documentation of the lottery win itself. Records of when Marcus had filed for divorce relative to when he cashed the ticket, and ideally, some form of admission or corroboration beyond Carmen's second-hand account. "Will your mother-in-law testify?" Priya asked. "Ex-mother-in-law," I said. "I don't know. I need to ask her." I called Carmen again that evening. I told her what Priya had said, what it would mean, that this would not be a small, quiet correction, this would be a legal proceeding that would put her son's deception on public record, that it might require her to testify against him. There was a long silence. "Carmen," I said, "I need to know if you're willing to do this before I go further. I won't be angry if you're not." She was quiet for a long time. "Lena," she said finally, "I raised my son to be honest. What he did to you, what he did to your marriage, it wasn't honest. It was the opposite of everything I tried to teach him." "That doesn't mean you have to testify against him," I said. "I know, but I'm going to." "Why?" She said, "Because he hurt you, deliberately, calculatedly, for money. And I have spent 3 years watching you not understand why, and I am done protecting him from the consequences of something he did on purpose." I held the phone. "Thank you, Carmen," I said. "Don't thank me. This should have happened 3 years ago. I'm just finally doing what I should have done from the beginning." Priya filed the motion in October. A motion to reopen the divorce proceedings based on evidence of fraudulent concealment of marital assets. Marcus's response, when he was served, was, according to what we learned later secondhand, disbelief. He had believed for 3 years, but the cleanliness of the original divorce filing meant the money had simply never existed, legally, within the marriage. He had not anticipated his mother. He hired an attorney, a man named Gregory Vance, expensive, the kind of attorney that $1.3 million, even after 3 years of living off it, could still afford. Vance's strategy, predictably, was to argue that the divorce was properly filed, that the ticket was purchased and won before the divorce was finalized, but that Marcus was not required to disclose income or assets acquired during a period when the marriage was, in his characterization, already effectively ended. Priya was not impressed by this argument. "The marriage wasn't effectively ended," she said in the deposition I sat in on. "They had dinner together every night that week. He kissed her goodbye for work the morning he checked the ticket. There's no evidence the marriage was ending until the exact moment he found out he'd won money he didn't want to share." The deposition lasted 3 hours. I watched Marcus answer questions through a video link. I had not seen his face in 3 years, and seeing it now, on a screen, answering careful lawyer questions about a ticket and a gas station and a Thursday night poker game, was a strange and specific kind of disorientation. He looked older. He looked, as Carmen had described, not happy. Carmen testified in November. I sat in the courtroom and watched her take the stand. 61 years old, the woman who had hugged me at my wedding and made tamales for every holiday for 5 years, sitting in a witness chair across from her own son. She testified clearly. She described the conversation a month before her letter, Marcus telling her, finally, after 3 years, what he had done. She described his exact words, as best she could recall them, that he had won the money, that he had panicked, that he'd decided ending the marriage quickly was cleaner than trying to figure out how to share it. Vance cross-examined her carefully, trying to establish that her account was second-hand, unreliable, colored by her relationship with her former daughter-in-law. Carmen held steady. "I am her mother," she said at one point. "I have no reason to lie about something that makes him look this bad. I am telling the truth because it is the truth, and because what he did to her was wrong." I watched Marcus during her testimony. He did not look at his mother. He looked at the table in front of him, the same way he had looked at the floor, I imagined, on the Friday evening 3 years before, when he had stood in our kitchen doorway and said 5 words and turned around and packed a bag. The financial discovery process took 4 months. Priya had brought in a forensic accountant, a meticulous woman named Yuki Tanaka, who specialized in tracing concealed assets through divorce and bankruptcy proceedings. Yuki's job was to establish definitively the timeline: when the ticket was purchased, when it was won, when it was cashed, and how the money had been managed in the 3 years since. The timeline was damning. The ticket, Thursday, March 14, 1713, at a gas station in Pilsen, 3 blocks from our apartment. The win confirmed, Friday, March 15, 7:42 a.m., via the Illinois Lottery mobile app, while Marcus, by his own admission, was on his way to work. The divorce filing, Friday, March 15, 4:15 p.m., filed in person before he came home that evening. He had won the money in the morning. He had filed for divorce that afternoon. He had come home that evening and asked me for a divorce as though it were a decision he had just made. It had been a decision he had made within hours of learning he had $800,000 that he did not want to share. The money itself, cashed 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, structured carefully to avoid attracting attention, moved through a series of accounts that Yuki described, with the specific, dry precision of a forensic accountant, as consistent with someone attempting to obscure the source and timeline of a large sum. "He hid it well," Yuki told Priya and me in a meeting in November. "He's not stupid. He understood that if the money's existence and timeline became known, this exact situation would happen. He structured everything to prevent that." "And yet, here we are," Priya said. "Because his mother told the truth," Yuki said. "That's the one thing he couldn't account for." I want to tell you about the specific feeling of learning all of this. Not the legal proceedings themselves. Those were procedural, methodical, the kind of process that has its own momentum once it begins. I mean the specific feeling of understanding, piece by piece, exactly how deliberate the thing that happened to me had been. I had spent 3 years believing I was the victim of a marriage that simply failed. I was instead the victim of a calculation. Marcus had won money. He had immediately understood, within hours, the timeline showed, within hours, that the cleanest path to keeping that money entirely for himself was to end the marriage before the money could be characterized as ours. He had not agonized over this for weeks. He had not panicked into a hasty decision, as Carmen had initially described it to me. He had checked the numbers at 7:42 in the morning. He had filed for divorce at 4:15 that same afternoon. 8 hours and 33 minutes. That is how long my husband took to decide that $1.3 million was worth more to him than 5 years of marriage. I sat with that number for a long time. 8 hours and 33 minutes. The hearing was in January. Judge Patricia Holloway presided, a woman in her late 50s with the specific weary precision of someone who has seen every variety of human deception that divorce proceedings produce and is no longer surprised by any of it, but who had not, based on her questions during the hearing, seen quite this specific configuration before. Priya presented the case methodically. The timeline, the forensic accounting, Carmen's testimony, the specific legal standard for fraudulent concealment of marital assets, and the case law supporting the court's discretion to remedy egregious cases with significant, even total, reallocation of the concealed asset. Vance argued on behalf of Marcus's that while the timing was unfortunate, there was no legal requirement that a person disclose a windfall received the same day they decided to end a marriage, and that Marcus's actions, while perhaps lacking in graciousness, did not rise to the level of fraud. Judge Holloway was not persuaded. I want to quote what she said, because I have read the transcript many times since, and I think her words deserve to be remembered exactly. She said, "Mr. Reyes checked a winning lottery ticket at 7:42 in the morning and filed for divorce at 4:15 that same afternoon, before ever informing his wife of either fact. He then went home and ended a 5-year marriage without explanation, allowing his wife to believe for 3 years that something in their relationship had simply failed. This was not a failure of marriage. This was a calculated act of deception, executed within hours, designed specifically to deprive his spouse of a marital asset she was legally entitled to. The court does not take this lightly." She paused. "In cases of this severity," she continued, "where concealment is not merely a failure of disclosure, but a deliberate, time-sensitive scheme to defraud a spouse of marital property, this court has the discretion to remedy that fraud fully. I am exercising that discretion." I held my breath. The full amount of the concealed lottery winnings, including all interest and appreciation accrued since the original win, is awarded to the petitioner, Lena Whitfield. The full amount, $1.3 million plus 3 years of interest and investment growth at Marcus's careful management, the same careful management that had structured the money to avoid attention, had, ironically, increased. The final figure, after the accounting was complete, was just over $1.5 million. All of it. To me. I sat in the courtroom and I did not feel what I expected to feel. I had expected, somewhere in the months of legal proceedings, that I would feel triumphant when this moment arrived. I had imagined it in the specific way you imagine outcomes during long, difficult processes, as a moment of vindication, of victory, of the universe finally correcting something that had been deeply wrong. What I actually felt was quieter. I felt the specific, complicated relief of someone who has finally been told, by an authority with the power to say it definitively, what happened to you was real, and it was wrong, and it was not your fault. For 3 years I had carried a question I could not answer. Why had he left? The answer, when it finally arrived, was not romantic or emotional, or any of the things I had spent 3 years imagining it might be. The answer was a number, and the number was now, by order of the court, mine. Marcus did not look at me when the ruling was read. He looked at the table. The same way he had looked at the floor 3 years and 1 Friday evening before, when he stood in our kitchen doorway and said 5 words. I have wondered, many times since, what was in his face in that moment, whether it was grief or anger, or the specific, exhausted relief of someone whose careful 8-hour and 33-minute plan had finally, after 3 years, completely unraveled. I will never know. I did not ask him. We did not speak after the hearing. His attorney filed an appeal, which Priya told me was expected but unlikely to succeed given the specific severity of the fraud and the clarity of the timeline. The appeal was denied 4 months later. The ruling stood. I walked out of the courthouse on a January afternoon in Chicago, the specific bitter cold of a Chicago January settling around me, and I stood on the steps for a moment. And I thought about a wooden spoon, about pasta water boiling over, about 5 words said in a doorway, and about 8 hours and 33 minutes. I have thought a great deal about what to do with $1.5 million. Not immediately. In the first months after the ruling, I did very little with it beyond ensuring it was properly invested and managed, which Priya helped me arrange through a financial advisor she trusted. I needed time before I made any large decisions. I had spent 3 years rebuilding a life around the assumption that I had nothing extraordinary, and the sudden presence of something extraordinary required its own period of adjustment. I bought a condo in Logan Square, not extravagant, but mine, the first home I have ever owned outright, with a kitchen that gets afternoon light and a small balcony where I have started, somewhat tentatively, to grow tomatoes. I paid off my parents' mortgage. This was the first thing I decided, and the thing I am most certain was correct. My father had worked for the city's water department for 31 years. My mother had been a nurse for 28. They had given me, throughout my childhood and through the worst of my divorce, more than they had, in the specific, generous way of parents who believe their child's well-being is worth more than their own comfort. I paid off their mortgage in February. My mother cried. My father, who does not cry easily, came close. I went back to school, part-time, alongside my work, pursuing the CPA certification I had always wanted but had never had the financial security to pursue without worry. Accounting had always interested me, the specific satisfaction of finding where numbers don't add up and understanding why, which is, I have come to realize with some irony, exactly the skill set that allowed Yuki Tanaka to trace Marcus's concealment so precisely. I am drawn to that work now in a way I was not before. The specific work of finding what someone has tried to hide. I have wondered if this is a strange thing to be drawn to given everything. My therapist, I started seeing someone, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Voss, in the months after the ruling, because I understood that a year of legal proceedings and an unexpected windfall and the slow unraveling of a 3-year mystery had left things in me that needed proper attention. My therapist does not think it strange. She said in one of our early sessions, "You spent 3 years not understanding something that happened to you. It makes sense that you're drawn to work that's about understanding things precisely, about not letting concealment win." I have thought about that a great deal. About not letting concealment win.
Carmen and I still speak. Regularly, actually. More regularly than we did in the final years of my marriage to her son, when the relationship had settled into the comfortable but less attentive rhythm of an established family connection. We have something different now. Not despite what happened, because of it, in a complicated way. She chose, at real cost to her relationship with her son, to tell me the truth. That choice created something between us that does not have an easy name. Not quite family, not in the legal sense anymore, but something real. She told me over coffee last month that she and Marcus barely speak now. "He's angry at me," she said. "He thinks I betrayed him." "Did you?" I asked. She thought about it for a long moment. "I told the truth," she said. "If that's a betrayal, then I suppose I did. But I think the actual betrayal happened 3 years before I said anything. I think he betrayed you, and he betrayed the values I tried to raise him with, and I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of that." I'm sorry you lost your relationship with your son, I said. She looked at her coffee. I haven't lost it, she said. I've just stopped wanting to lose myself inside it. There's a difference. I do not know where Marcus is now. I have not asked. I know from the financial disclosures during the proceedings that even after the full award to me, he retained some assets before the lottery win. Not nothing, just not the life-altering sum he had tried to keep entirely for himself. I imagine he is somewhere, rebuilding something, the way people do. I do not think about him often. This surprises me sometimes, that a person who occupied the center of my understanding of myself for 5 years and the center of my confusion for 3 more has receded so completely from my daily thoughts. But that is, I think, what genuine resolution does. It does not require ongoing attention. It simply settles, the way ground settles after something has been properly excavated and properly filled back in. I think more often about the wooden spoon, about standing at the stove on a Friday evening, 25 years old, watching pasta water boil over while my husband packed a bag in the next room. I think about that version of myself, the one who did not know yet what had actually happened, who would spend 3 years constructing explanations that were all, eventually, proven wrong. I want to tell her something, that version of myself. I want to tell her that the explanation she could not find was not a failure of her own understanding. It was a secret, deliberately kept, by someone who decided that money mattered more than honesty. And I want to tell her that the secret would not stay a secret forever. That eventually a mother would choose truth over protection. That eventually a court would rule in very clear language that what had been done to her was wrong. That eventually she would stand on a courthouse step in January, in the bitter Chicago cold, holding something that was not just money. Holding something, finally, an answer. That's the whole story. Or the part I'm ready to tell. I want to say something about secrets. About the specific, particular weight of not understanding why something happened to you. About the years that can pass while you construct explanation after explanation, none of them true, because the actual truth was deliberately kept from you by someone who calculated with cold precision exactly what they needed to hide and how to hide it. For 3 years, I believed my marriage had simply failed. It had not failed. It had been ended, deliberately, and within hours, by a man who checked a winning number at 7:42 in the morning and decided by 4:15 that afternoon that he would rather lose me than share what he had won. I did not know that for 3 years. And then I knew it. And the not knowing, as painful as it had been, turned out to be temporary. The truth arrived eventually. It almost always does. Sometimes it takes years, but it arrives. And when it does, you are allowed to act on it. You are allowed to ask for what you are owed. You are allowed to stand in courtroom and hear a judge say in language as clear as Judge Holloway's was that what happened to you was wrong, and that the law has a remedy for it. I am still in Chicago. Still in Logan Square with my condo with the afternoon light. Still here. More than okay. Thanks for listening.